We've really enjoyed this method called photo voice, where we've asked guys to take pictures of their experience of something. And so we did it with suicidality, we did it with depression. And these photographs are lovely because they'll have the photograph and then we'll interview them around the photograph. So it stops that direct Q&A kind of thing where guys can get a bit weirded out because I want to give you the right answer and I don't know what that is, you know. So if they're talking to a photograph, it kind of just spills out and the narrative builds.
Hi everyone, you've just heard Dr. John Oliffe from the University of British Columbia discuss his research on masculinity and men's health behaviors. He was joined by my podcast partner, Eric Landrum, along with Eric's colleague, Matt Genuchi, in a special guest interviewing role. We hope you like what you've heard so far, so stick around for this great interview on Psych Sessions. Hi everyone, Garth here. You know what I want out of a textbook? I want to know that my students are taking responsibility for their own learning, but I also want that textbook to support the learning, making it really interesting. Turns out that Norton Publishing has a solution. Have you ever seen the book Interactive Psychology for your intro course? It's a dynamic, digital, low-cost book, and it introduces students to psychological science through experiences. It really values active learning. It's all in the title, and it comes from authors who have been doing this for a long time. From an instructor perspective, it allows you to hold your students accountable for their learning, and from a student perspective, there's lots of opportunity to do really interesting things like participate in experiments and analyze data and explore cultural similarities and differences. They really work to make this book come to life. Again, it's Interactive Psychology from Norton, and you can check it out at siegel.wwnorton.com/psych sessions. That's Siegel, like the bird, SEAGULL.wwnorton.com/psych sessions, and that's all lowercase. Check it out. Macmillan knows it can be difficult to build academic integrity in the classroom. With more tools and opportunities out there for students to cut corners, it can be tempting for them to act dishonestly to get ahead. But academic integrity is about more than just cheating. It also includes positive behaviors, like demonstrating personal achievements and receiving feedback with humility. Achieve for Psychology helps you build academic integrity in the classroom by offering adaptive quizzing for personalized learning and all new goal setting and reflection surveys, providing your students with frequent, low-stakes assignments that also prepare them for exams is a great way to reduce the course stresses that often lead to cheating. Achieve's goal setting and reflection surveys also help students set goals and provide you the means to check in with students. Helping students feel more comfortable in a class and with their study materials helps you keep academic dishonesty out of the classroom. Preview how Achieve helps build academic integrity in the classroom at macmillanlearning.com/psych sessions. The Psych Sessions podcast is sponsored by STP. That is the Society for the Teaching of Psychology. That's APA Division 2. You can find them at teachpsych.org. The views or product endorsements expressed do not represent the views, support, or endorsements of STP. Psych Sessions is so grateful to have STP as a long-term supporter.
Welcome. This is a very special edition of Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff. Not only do we have a special guest, but we have a special guest host. I'm here with Dr. Matt Genuchi, my colleague and friend from Boise State University. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, thanks for being here. And we have an extra special guest, which is why you're a guest host. Matt, why don't you introduce our guest?
So our guest today is Dr. John Oliffe, who's here from the University of British Columbia.
Awesome. So, hi, John.
Hi, Eric. How are you?
Good. So we've all wondered before your visit. It's obviously Matt just said it correctly. It's Oliffe,
Right.
and not Oliffe.
It's meant to be Oliffe, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good. I just want to make sure that we got that for the record. All right.
Absolutely.
Well, when he told me that, I realized that actually the entire time that I've been teaching his work that I've mispronounced his name. So he corrected. He didn't correct me, but when I asked him, I realized I've been mispronouncing it.
Okay. Well, it's kind of one. Okay, good. We got it. All right.
We got it right.
I can edit out my mumbling too. I can edit out anything you guys want me to, but I usually edit. When I edit out mostly myself. That's what I end up doing. So, John, you've been visiting Boise State here for a few days, and we've loved your visit. Can you tell our audience a little bit here? I'm gonna read the formality. John, you're the professor in Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in Men's Health Promotion at the School of Nursing, University of British Columbia, Canada, with a joint fractional appointment at the Department of Nursing, University of Melbourne, Australia. That's all our time together today. Thanks very much for joining. No, I'm sorry. John, would you tell our audience a little bit about what you do and what your specialty is?
Yeah, sure. So we run the University of British Columbia. We've got a men's health research program. I've been lucky enough to be the founder and lead of that. And to help me do that work, they awarded me a research chair, which allows me to focus on research. And the mainstay of what we do these days is definitely around mental health, and in particular, male depression and looking at the connections to suicidality and male suicide, indeed. And so it's been sort of our focus over the last probably 7 to 10 years, probably a bit longer. And so, yeah, we've been in that space for some time. So we like to find out about the problems, and we are quite committed to building programs that hopefully can make a difference to outcomes. So we might describe the problems, but we really are wedded to the idea of building interventions, for want of a better term, and programs that might be tailored to guys that would help them avoid the outcomes that are associated with, suicide.
Matt, this stuff kind of dovetails with your research as well, which is why you invited John to Boise State. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very familiar with John's work, and so that's one of the reasons I wanted to, highlight that and showcase that, just because of that's my familiarity with his work, but how much it's impacted the field. And so, yeah, my hope was that I could share that with everybody else, not just me, but that other folks here at Boise State could learn about the great work that he and his team are doing at British Columbia.
Well, I could ask 42 questions, but Matt, I'm going to let you, as my guest co-host, ask John questions and introduce him to our audience.
Well, a question to get started here, I think might be interesting. I think that John's maybe pushing the limits a little bit of psych sessions, in that he's not a psychologist. He's not been trained as a psychologist.
What? What? This is the first I'm learning of this.
He snuck in.
Hello?
Yeah. So I was wondering maybe if you could tell us a little bit about your professional background, your training and...
Yeah, so for sure. So I was, I'm a nurse, right? So a registered nurse. So I was back in the day of the hospital training back in Australia. And so, sort of did that 3-year course, did a master's in education, did a graduate degree in pediatrics, because we had so many kids turning up in the emergency room that I wanted to understand how to help the kids, and then did a PhD in health sciences. So the the PhD was kind of more in the health sciences area, and it didn't necessarily look at mental health, although it did, engage some of that around prostate cancer. Mm-hmm. And then I had 20 years clinical in the emergency department. So, so a kind of a clinical background. And it's interesting because you see mental health and you see mental illness and you work with it in the context. But, yeah, you're right. In terms of formal training, no. We had psych lectures in the undergraduate degree, and not a lot. And but most of my experience has been in talking to guys in the research space, about some of their challenges with mental illness and suicidality. And I've learnt a lot from colleagues who are psychiatrists, psychologists, and it's been a bit of an interesting ride, just because I'm interested in the discovery around, how to build things that might help, and also better understanding the problems, and the challenges.
Was it difficult? I'm sorry, Matt. So your questions are not done.
Yeah.
No, sorry.
No worries. No. You've cut him off.
He's used to this. I'm sorry that there may be more truth to that than I'm willing to admit. Was it? I don't know the demographics in Australia. More nursing students female than male, like it is in the U.S.?
You can make an impact with PsychLearn. PsychLearn from the American Psychological Association is a complete, all-digital instructional resource for psychology courses. PsychLearn's coverage of research methods and statistics drives deeper engagement than traditional printed textbooks, immersing students in multidimensional learning experiences with engaging content for practice and formative assessment. Structured around applied cognitive science, PsychLearn helps students gain confidence in their understanding of foundational concepts and build toward critical learning outcomes. Learn more about PsychLearn's course material for research methods and statistics for the behavioral sciences when you visit pl.apa.org/sessions. That's PL for PsychLearn, pl.apa.org/sessions.
It's never ever really taken off as a male occupation. So I don't think we've ever broken the 10% mark. We've always run underneath that, and I'd say the same at UBC. For me, in Canada, and I worked in the UK for a little while, and it's always been the same. It's been a minority, and it's a bit of it's interesting because such a great job and such reward and such it is a terrific job. I loved it. Loved the clinical work and loved the research and the progressions that you can make. It's one of those ones where the gender split is quite. It's never really. We never really got to, sort of equality around the gender split. It's very much a female-dominated area. And psychology is a little bit the same too, I guess, in some ways.
Yeah, it depends. At the undergraduate level, if you look at number of majors, at least in the U.S., it's highly female-dominated, about 75% female undergraduates in the U.S.
Yeah.
As you go towards doctoral, actually, I think it increases a little bit towards 80% female doctorates in the U.S. Yeah, it just leans a little bit higher that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
very much so. I'm sorry. You're probably going down a road there, but today you're fairly far removed from that nursing background then, with all your additional training and background.
Yeah, people talk about nursing research, and I think they have an idea that it might be bedside, it might have to do with particular procedures that you might do, and evidence-based bedside kind of nursing. And I've never really done that research. I've always kind of been in the psychology, social sciences, and it just happens to be that my background has been, clinically in nursing. So I think we're a little bit more inclusive and open to the diversity that is nurse researchers these days. That might be the origin, but you might be in spaces that wouldn't typically be associated with the traditional idea of what nurses do. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the journal articles that you were showing yesterday of your colleagues and your own are very interdisciplinary, from what I can recall. Right. I mean, they're not in some of them could be considered psychology mainstream, but they're also mental health mainstream. I mean,
yeah, and when they categorize the collection of articles that I've been involved in, and oftentimes they'll, award you a number or tell you where you are in the world, they actually rank me in the psychology field. They don't rank me, in a nursing research field. So I agree. I think the optics of where we publish and the things that we're talking about probably, position me somewhat in doing that work, which is it's a great honor, and it's great to be in those venues, those outlets, and also working with folks in the space, authentically in the space, and learning from them. You learn a lot from the people you co-write with, and as well as the research participants that you talk to. It's kind of nice, yeah.
I'm wondering how you made that decision. You wanted to be a nurse. Like, how did you get there?
So
we're kind of talking some about the end game, like
perfect.
Kind of
perfect question.
So I wasn't really bright at school, but like you probably noticed, I'm not super bright. And I battled a little bit, and I probably didn't do as well in my last year. And nobody of my family or peer group went to university. So I, like many people, just took a job, after high school. And I took a job in a bank and realised I didn't really care for money or people whinging about money. So I thought, I'll go and I'll do something. And I didn't have the marks for university. And so I went and did nursing because it was done in a hospital, trained in a hospital. And then I eventually got to go to university after that. I finished the nursing degree and did a few years on the floor, working clinically, and then was ready to kind of take on some new things and was able to go to university. So it was, the whole idea, I loved working with people. I loved that it was immediate, that you knew, like what we were saying today, I knew when I had a good day, I knew when I didn't. It was pretty immediate clinically, and I loved that aspect of it. So I just loved the job. It was great. So it was I felt that I'd like it because it would be people and it would be tangible, and it turned out to be the truth of it. So I was lucky. And it was, it wasn't in an Australian culture, in a very traditional family, it was, it was something I think Mum and Dad were a bit like, what's he doing? But it turned out pretty good. Yeah.
So I know that you're probably not both regular listeners of this podcast, and that's okay. Trust me, it's really okay. So, John, I have to come back to a couple of things that you've said already. So you're familiar with the term imposter phenomenon, right?
Yes.
Okay, maybe you know where I'm going here. So, John, you said that you're not very bright. Okay, and that you've been lucky. I want to come back to these for just a moment. And we've had a really cordial relationship for the past day or so, and I don't want to ruin that. But, John, could you estimate for me, just ballpark back of the napkin, the number of grant dollars that you've brought in to you and your lab, your institutions over the course of your career?
I should be able to, because we do track it. It might be. I think it's 30 million. I think it's around 30 million. I think.
So someone not very bright can bring in $30 million in grants.
Yeah.
Wow. Imagine what you could do if you were bright.
I know. I could have done much better.
Uh-oh.
It's true.
So I understand so one of the things that I talk to faculty and students about is that I understand the desire for humility, and I'm not trying to call you out. Actually, I think I am. Okay. You're incredibly bright. And it took a lot of hard work to earn those grants, and those grants were competitive and an amazing amount of hard work, and there wasn't luck. People didn't go around giving you money. Oh, there's John Oliffe. Oh, let's give him 10 mil. He's a good bloke.
Yeah. Let's
give him 10 mil. You worked really incredibly hard for those, and you're doing a lot of good for a lot of men in the world. So people are uncomfortable taking a bow. People are uncomfortable taking compliments. And people in my life have taught me this. And so I'm sorry to just interject this, and we can edit all of this out if you'd like me to.
No, Eric, I appreciate you saying it. I think one of the things I'd say is that I honestly believe, in relation to how we learn and when we get momentum, I think for me, I was late, and so I got better as time went on.
Of course, we all do.
But I also got better at learning, and I got a bit more interested. And I think oftentimes I always remember Malcolm Knowles' work around education, and he would say that readiness to learn. And I think part of my lack of advancement was really I wasn't ready. And so it took me time. So when I reflect back on it, I go, gee, it was a slow start, but then, with good mentorship, it kind of took off, and it was great in that way. But yeah, I take your point. It's you should celebrate the wins, and and that has occurred on occasion. Where we do that. But yeah, I appreciate you.
I've heard very famous psychologists say, "I was just lucky." And I've tried to gently correct them on the podcast, saying if all the rest of us just wait for luck,
right,
that's not a good career strategy.
Yeah,
it's the hard work and collaborating, like I know you value.
Yeah,
those are good strategies. I'm sorry, I'll get off my bandwagon and my soapbox and step back down now.
No, that is definitely a theme for psych sessions.
It is indeed.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry.
I was wondering, you were talking about, you were the first person in your family, I think that you said to go to university or have like training after, is it high school? You say high school? What would that like? Or in Australia, what would that be?
Like, it's like year 12. You've had 7 years at primary school and 5 years at high school.
Okay.
And then, your mark would determine whether you could get into a university and what course you could do within the university.
Okay.
And so you had one of 3 buckets, and you didn't get the bucket that went to university?
Right, I didn't.
Gotcha.
But I did pass that last year, just to say I snuck in by 16 points, and which was great. All my mates failed. We had a bit of a party, and we all went into jobs.
Okay.
Yeah. So it wasn't really something that was on our radar, and we weren't being coached into there's something after this. It was a job. You would go to a job, and the only person that beat me in the family was my sister, because she was a couple of years ahead of me, a couple of years older, and she did go to university, but she took a year in a job as well to work out that she really wanted to go, but she had the marks.
Okay.
To get accepted and just defer. I didn't. I had no offers. I was undrafted, but that's okay.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I heard you were mentioning yesterday, kind of with that what it was like to tell your folks that you were going to go to nursing or be a nurse.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, what it was like to tell your parents.
Australian culture is pretty, we have a relationship to, how men are, and our tropes around masculinity, that we're pretty silent, we don't mind a drink, and we really, we take the piss. We just tease each other. That's what we do, and it's kind of that's our cultural background. I'm very familiar with it. I kind of like it, but of course, if you break code with what guys typically do, which is what I did, then it's going to attract a certain amount of what's going on here. What are we doing here? And because a bank job was which I had was, well, it's a job for life. Yeah. What's wrong with that? It'll be okay. That's what guys do. Plenty of guys in the bank, and of course to transition into nursing, just, was kind of like, not really sure where this is going, and will he be okay with this?
Yeah.
Like, does he know what he's getting into? Like, shift work. It's not what guys do. So it took it just took a little bit of adjustment for everyone, including me, right? Like, because I went in and you don't know really what you're going into. Just happened to be lucky enough to love it. Just thought it was great. Like, it was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember you talking about that yesterday. It seemed like nursing was kind of like you're getting out of your lane a little bit.
Well, you are. And there was a certain class, when I went in the 80s, there was a certain class element to it as well.
Okay.
That probably wasn't considered, in a hierarchy of healthcare provision. It probably wasn't quite where it is now. So it was kind of seen as, probably that kind of menial work in the healthcare system as well, like no autonomy, no decision making, no route for advancement, that you stayed on the floor until you couldn't do the floor and that was it. But the world changed a little bit in terms of progression. You see nurses, as presidents of universities, as heading up hospitals, CEOs, you see them everywhere with a nursing background. So it's, those 40 years, it's kind of shifted, I think, which is great, a terrific thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you get through that? You're kind of taking us through like your nursing degree and then into university, your master's, your doctorate. Where in that journey did you get interested? I think I stepped pretty far away from my mic there. Sorry.
Yeah.
Like doing my psychologist, in the room thing. Where in that journey did you get interested in men's health work?
Right. So I think part of it was, if you are in a female-dominated area, you're going to start thinking about gender a little bit. And so nursing, you can't not interrogate gender if you're in a female-dominated area. I was just like, so I started thinking about gender, and I had worked in the emergency room, and I could see guys coming in, and they'd be clutching middle chest, and they'd be diaphoretic, and they'd be denying chest pain, and I'd be watching this, and I'd be like, so you'd always triage them in because you knew what was happening for them. It was probably a cardiac event, so you could see things, but I didn't understand, around the behaviours, the denial, pain, or pain is the cardinal sign that would bring you into an emergency room. So I sort of started to think about it. I also had a grandfather who died of prostate cancer, and he was a lovely bloke, well-intentioned, but had some substance use issues, and probably we didn't see the best of him, and he didn't see the best of himself. And, so one of the things he said to my dad before he died was that, he didn't want to be the way he was. And so again, he didn't die. He did die of prostate cancer and the metastases, but I think there was a lot of things that went on for him in and around that experience. So, and I had shared a bedroom with him as an adolescent, and he taught me how to fold my trousers. He did all of those things, and he's quite a complex character. And I was just cued to the gender dimensions that had gone on for him, and I was just intrigued, about that generation and what that meant for me and my dad, trying to understand my dad and working through that. So I had a real interest in gender, and then the health side of it, I could also see an angle that there were things that were relational and disparate with guys that, if you paid attention to, you might be able to think about behaviours and then think about, lofty remedies that might alter the course. So, yeah, long answer to your question, but yeah, just kind of got intrigued, and still am just deeply interested in discovery, trying to make sense of it. And I think, in your own life, you try to make sense of things too.
Yeah. I mean, that makes me think of my own experience, like as a kid, like growing up in kind of a rural, masculine culture, right? Like seeing how that works, and watching how guys communicate and being part of it, right? Kind of being immersed in it, and also kind of seeing how it works, but then kind of not having a good name for it, right? And so I remember, the first time that I was able to kind of say, look, this is this masculine culture, and this is how it works, and to be able to kind of label it and see it and understand it, that was really important for me.
Yeah, and it took me a long time to see it.
Yeah.
So I bought in So I did all the sports stuff, you know, and I did okay with that. I did the drinking culture with friends growing up. I did it, you know, I bought in because it was a normative frame. And I do think in breaking code and going nursing, I just started to see things differently. So it was, my epiphany was probably a bit later. Like when I was in it, I couldn't see it. It's like culture sometimes. You're in it and you just don't see it. I think I was quite wedded to the idea of that's how it is.
Yeah.
But was able to pivot with different exposures. And nursing was an exposure, like exposure to female-dominated workplace, but also an exposure to vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
I would see folks coming in that were just in needed support. Like there was nothing stoic about it. A lot of times they were articulating concerns and worries, and you were working with that. So it just shifted. It was a bit of a reality check for me. And so it spilled into the gender side of it to think, oh, hang on, like this is a prop, or this is in part facade, or this is idealised and romanticised, but it ain't it, you know? Like there's a bit more to this. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like the fish in the water metaphor. It's like for culture, right? You don't realize you're swimming in the water, right? Because you're surrounded by the water. So it sounds like for you, there was an opportunity to be in some different water, right? And kind of realize it and point it out.
Yeah, and it's very different. Yeah.
So that was your where you became like interested in and began to like see this masculine culture in your own life and how it was affecting these guys it sounds like in the hospital. How did you become interested in kind of the work you do now, like around suicidality, depression, things like that? How did you get started with that?
I guess I reckon everyone gets touched by depressive symptoms and anxiety. And so I could see it, and oftentimes I could feel it, you know, so I had a sense of it. I had a few mates who suicided, and that was, you know, complicated grief. And so the idea of better understanding it was just, you know, so persuasive.
Yeah.
To try and get into that frame and think about what it is and why it is, and then what elements could we undo, what elements could we make a difference in, you know, just became interested in that. And of course, in the emergency room, you know, I was so focused on how to save a life that the mental health bits you might have been cued, you might have even seen, but you probably didn't do a great job of managing it because the focus was on triage them in on a physical space, and then let's work with what's there. The mental health we didn't do a great job of. I think there's improvements there, just to say, but yeah, I just became interested in it, like, you know, personal experiences and watching folks. And like I say, I'd give a normative frame that we all to some degree get some depressive symptoms sometimes, and we all experience anxiety.
Right.
And so it's like tonic, like to understand how other folks are going with it and what matters to them and how it manifests, and it's tonic for me as well to understand that.
Yeah. So a significant piece of that was motivated by your own personal experiences with those.
Yeah, because we, you know, if you're jobs, you know, working strange hours, all those sorts of things, all the things that touch us, you know, they're personal experiences for sure. So to try and make sense of it and to try and remedy, you know, so the self-management stuff I firmly believe in, you know, in terms of thinking about how you can be the best you can be. Yeah.
So maybe take us through a little bit. What are some of the things that you've worked on in those areas? Some of the work that you've done, some of the some of those problems you've tried to understand in those areas around men's health, around suicide, depression?
Yeah, in terms of the research side. Yeah. So we've done a lot of work with guys where we've really enjoyed this method called photo voice, where we've asked guys to take pictures of their experience of something. And so we did it with suicidality, we did it with depression. And these photographs are lovely because they'll have the photograph and then we'll interview them around the photograph. So it stops that direct Q&A kind of thing where guys can get a bit weirded out because I want to give you the right answer and I don't know what that is, you know. So if they're talking to a photograph, it kind of just spills out and the narrative builds, and then I'll say something like, but can you tell me a little bit more about, you know, you said something about X, could you tell me a bit more about that? And they talk to the photograph and we're sort of shoulder to shoulder. There's nothing, you know, direct, and they'll just be able to talk and work their way through it. And I've learnt so much from their experiences. And, you know, one part that I talked to tonight, you know, just that notion of injury, interiority and isolation even, and you can see it in the photographs and how they map injury, and sometimes they're cumulative injuries, the things that happen along our lives or things that we think guys should get past and they just don't. And that interiority of looking inside and looking for resource at a time when you're kind of depleted, and that isolation that comes with the concealment of what you're experiencing because of the stigma and those sorts of things. So it gets beautifully laid out and it helps tell a story that you can think about multiple intervention points where you mightn't be able to make a difference and step into the space or just give them room to unpack the stuff that they're concealing, you know, those opportunities. So yeah, I've probably gone off on a tangent, Matt, but yeah, I've learnt so much because guys are great at teaching. They're just wonderful at they'll under the pretense of teaching you something, they will disclose. They will go there, and I love that. You know, so a lot of times, even in the early work, I go to prostate cancer support groups. Like, you know, back in the day, they'd say, "What are you doing here?" You know, because I was too young to be there. Now they say, "What's your PSA?" But you know, it's like, but you know, again, they took on a teaching role, and guys are great at that. But you know, we don't tap that enough because they'll share experience in the right, if you can create the right environment.
And a big part of your work has been looking at those opportunities for guys to tell their stories. You know? Yeah. I mean, I love narratives. I like the idea of narrative therapy a bit. I interviewed these guys that got dumped, and you know, partners left them, and there was 25 of them, and you know, there was the guys who were bystanders, like just withdrew from the relationship and stayed in it. It was distressed, and their narrative just kept going around and around. There was another group where they were the victims, you know, of circumstance. Not the victim of a bad partner necessarily, but just the victim of circumstance. And that would go round and round. And 5 of them got to a point of getting out of those narratives and getting to a point where they started to go, oh, I could have shown up better. I could have done some other stuff. I might make some adjustments. I might just be, you know, sit with me rather than we, and start to work some of that stuff out. Anyway, I thought it was very, very cool. But we do get caught in our narratives. So the stories I hear are super interesting, and I do. You know, I idealise the notion that we might be able to help change the storyline for guys, to help them think about, you know, maybe progressing it to a place where it's, you know, it's not the Pollyanna, like you know, I've got closure. It's more like I got some growth here. Like I got something from this that's not just, you know, caught in a narrative of victim or bystander, withdrawn. You know, I got something else. So yeah, the stories they're important because they don't always get told.
Yeah. We try to create an environment where it happens, and they're to be valued, because they're not easily told, and they're not easily analysed either.
Yeah.
We spend a lot of time with the stories, and you feel like the folks, and it's kind of it's sweet, it's good, yeah.
There's a thread here, so I'm connecting. I'll talk for just a second, but I'm with you. So as you're talking about the narratives, right, of these guys that you've worked with, and all the work that you've done, right, and all the different studies you've done. What I do with my students is we look at like a lot of quantitative work on like guys in depression, and then we look at qualitative work, a lot of your work, and then we talk about. They both have this place of helping us understand, right, these guys and the struggles they're experiencing and the pain they're experiencing, and how they're kind of two sides of the coin, how they fit together, right? It's not qualitative versus quantitative, but they each have their place. And I'm thinking of this is a podcast we can't see, right? But I'm thinking of this image that you showed yesterday, right, in your talk, where you kind of showed this picture demonstrating this kind of tension between quantitative and qualitative research. And, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, that your experience of being a qualitative researcher and the value of these narratives that you have, and maybe a little bit about, I don't know, your experience. I think you're kind of noting some of the tension between qualitative and quantitative research.
Yeah, I've been fortunate enough to get educated in quantitative by peers. So I have a real appreciation of how it works and how you think about it. You literally have to think differently, and I love that. I think it's so interesting. Even the bookends on those papers, they are just written differently to our, more expressive kind of qualitative world, but I really appreciate that's not easy work. I appreciate the craft, and I agree with you, Matt. We say things that are very similar. Like our findings, they're not discordant. Most of the time, they're like bang on. Yeah. And I'm like, I love that quant stuff. It's not my expertise. I've been well educated by great people who I've worked with. Simon Rice is a real talent. John Grazenchuk's very patient with me, helps me through things, so I understand things, and then I help write around the edges for those papers, and it's so great. And then the qualitative piece, they have a deep appreciation that I'm the guy who's bringing the qualitative stuff to it. So it's a co-op. It works really well. And so, my reaction to that going out on Twitter is, to say something's fanciful is qualitative. It's just hard on people, because we convince guys that it's going to be good to talk to us, because we will look after their narratives. We will care for their narratives, and do the work of that. And I know it was the image was meant to sort of say to researchers, a bit tongue-in-cheek, have a bit of a joke about it. And that's okay. I can take a joke. I'm fine. Thick-skinned. I've been around long enough. But it sends a bad message to the guys who sign up for those studies, and someone says to them in the house, what are you doing? And the guy will go, I'm talking to someone about my depression. And they'll be like, why would you do that? Yeah. And so it just, to cheapen it is just, I don't think is wise. And I think we survive on stories, they're so important. All our movies, our history, they're stories. And it's not to say that the quant world doesn't do an amazing job. It's just to say we're both fighting the same war. Yeah. So, so it's well-intentioned. And I think one of the things that happens for qualitative is we tend to say super great at describing the problems in qualitative. Like, that's what it does. But that's 90% of the feed block of research. We describe the problems. There's 10% that get to interventions. And qualitative work can and does get to interventions. And I showed it, yesterday. It's like, well, those interventions are they're informed by men's stories about what the problems are and what might work. So we can get to it, and we can do evaluations that are qualitative as well. So we tend to have this kind of, it's descriptive, it's just that's all it'll ever be. It can be better than that. You got to push it. You got to stay in there for a while, but you can advance a program of research on qualitative. So it's, as you can with quant. But I like the idea that they complement each other. And, and like I say, I'm not gifted with numbers. I have trouble with the check account. I can't balance that. So when people are talking to me about regression mediator moderator, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, and I'm sort of working through it. But I've had guys who've been super patient with me, and I do have a good understanding, and I have a deep respect for the quant.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate your ability to speak to that, right? And how they each have their roles and how they work together. And I love the way that you talk to how important that is to respect those stories, right? And what that means to those stories of these participants that are part of that research.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Something that I'm struck by too, not just like you mentioned some of these folks that you work with, your colleagues, John, and you and I have been hanging out the past couple of days too, and you talk about these people that you work closely with at UBC, people that you work with in Australia. It seems like you have a lot of really close colleagues that support you, or some really close colleagues that support you in this research. I don't know, I was wondering maybe if you could talk a little bit about how you've cultivated such a good network of the people to work with. Like, it seems like that's really important. That's part of what's helped you to be a really successful researcher and academic. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you've done that.
So I was in an Australian system, and we were quite competitive, and I was teaching intensive, and I was told that I would never be anything but teaching intensive. And I was like, okay, that's okay. And then at the same time, they said, oh, we need you to do a PhD. And I'm like, okay, all right. So I wanted to go part-time. They said, no, you can't go part-time. So I'm like, all right. So it was just, there can be some really competitive pockets. And I think it's a bit like when you walk into a shop, you can usually tell the culture by the person who serves you. You can usually tell whether they're happy, whether they're into it, whether there's a good vibe in the shop, or whether it's some dude who just hates what they're doing and can't wait to get out of there, and the whole place is about to stink down, right? Yeah. And I think I was in that shop for a little while, and just wasn't where I wanted to be. And so one of the great things that happened with UBC is they recruited me. I was a rookie. I was rough as. Like, I was just 3 chapters into a PhD. I had the data, had the first 3 chapters sitting still, but had to write it up, really. And they brought me in, but they didn't just bring me in, they mentored me. So they could see things I couldn't see, career-wise, research program-wise, and not only could they see it, they were generous enough to coach me. And, so I had to work hard, and they were pretty tough. They were tough, but they knew I would respond to that too.
Okay.
So they read me. And so they understood that I would be okay with the hard knocks, and they pushed. And so my progression was about their mentorship. Like, I had things where I'd written once to ethics. And so they worked me with getting the ethics through quicker, because they would coach me. All of my blind spots, like, I had massive blind spots. I'd never published an article. Well, I published a couple, but they weren't, like high-end journals or anything like that. But I thought I could write, and then they tidied me up that way as well. So it was all this, it was kind of tough love. And I talk about Joy Johnson, who's now president of a university, and Joan Batorf, who's now she's kind of retiring and working away. But they were just gold for me. So I just wanted to, as you get towards the end, I'll probably run another 5 or 10 years. And and you just want the best for other people. You want to be able to help them progress, because you don't want things to finish with you. You want it all to just to be a good citizen.
Yeah.
And they really taught me that. So my connections with Simon Rice, John Grasnichak, Dave Keeley, Zach Sidley, you'll see our names on papers together. We've got early career researchers in that. We've got mid-career researchers in that. John and I are the elder statesmen, we're legacy effect, idealised and all that sort of stuff, and want to leave the world with something that's not just, sitting on Google Scholar. We want the field to progress. Yeah. And so we work with those guys, and it just works. Everyone, the ego's left at the door. We just help each other. We work our way through. I learned so much from them. They might learn some things from me. We share our experiences of the academy. We agree on most things. There's some things that we don't, and we learn from that. It's just a great ride, because so much of it is competitive. Like, we'll write a grant, we'll put it in. 85% of the time we don't get up. It's 15% of the time we go hurrah, and the rest is, and you're competing against everybody else. So you tend to just drive really hard, and so the academy can be really tough that way. So this is the collaboration. I'm wedded to the idea that we can do it, that it works, and that it's important, and it's a way better way to be. And I kind of like people. Like I do enjoy
helps,
people,
yeah,
right? So I'm like, when you're around good people, life's a hell of a lot easier. Like, in terms of just shooting the breeze and you don't feel like you're the only one going through it. So it's been great that way too. So the mentorship, is just so important. Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like that you learned this when you had mentors,
right,
that saw you and kind of supported you. They pushed you. You said that tough love, right? They pushed you some, but that was really important in progressing your career. And then you've incorporated that into some of these other folks that you brought into this team at different stages. That mentoring is important.
Exactly. You get a sense of them, because they could have brought me 8,500 miles. They could have sat me there and said, "You're lucky to be here," and they could have watched me write grants, for 20 years and not get any funding. Yeah. But no, they were like, they tidied up things, and not in track changes where you go accept changes. Yeah. They tidied them up in ink, where you kind of like looking at it going, I've got to make sense of this. They were rewrites. Yeah. They were solid rewrites, like all of it, manuscripts, grants, but then I'm helping people do exactly that now because of that experience, and also that process. You start to know where people are at. So I know I can kind of gauge where someone's blind spots are now, and I can read their work, and I can help. I genuinely can help. And I often say, like Joan Batorf in the early days, she used to write my endings. Because I get tired, I'd write the papers, and I'd get to the discussion and conclusion. I go, hands up in the air, I'm out. I'm tapping out here. I can't quite bridge it in a way that they're going to believe me, and I can't quite not repeat myself from the findings. I had enormous trouble with that. And Joan would write the ends, and and I'd have to chime in and work it and all the rest of it. But I learnt how to write the ends, and I finish papers for people now. So again, it's just those things along the way. They're like craft, but I love it. I love the idea that you can model it, that you can mentor, that you might make a bit of a difference. And sometimes people, I can be a bit hard on people, and the lesson that I'm trying to teach them, they might not recognise for a decade, but that's okay too. It's all right. Yeah. At least for me.
Yeah. I could use somebody like that to help me with. I still struggle with my endings.
Oh, they're hard,
Trying
isn't
to do
it?
that part. I feel like it's sometimes the hardest part of the paper.
Yeah, I still find it a challenge because I'm either too 35,000 foot and I've just blown said too much about the findings, or I'm off on a tangent, or else I've just repeated myself.
Yeah.
So it's such a tough spot, but it's the bit for me that I have to spend the most time on.
Yeah.
Crisp end. Yeah.
What does the mentorship look like for you on the teaching side, John, and your work with students? Like what kind of classes, or do you teach classes, graduate students? Do you carry a load of students that you supervise with dissertations? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that as well.
Yep, sure. So I teach one course a year, and I teach it in its health promotion and their graduates. And I take drafts of assignments because I believe that we should be able to help people learn to write. So it's not really fair if they send me their final assignment and I mark it and I go, this is not holding up. I want to help them in the craft of writing as well as the content. So I kind of enjoy that, it's kind of fun. And when I mark it, it's not the first time I read it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they're small classes. And then with graduates, we have masters, PhDs, and postdocs. The masters do a great job. A lot of them will do scoping reviews, so I help them. Scoping reviews are nice and manageable, or they might go a thesis option where they do some primary research, or I've got some data that they can do a secondary analysis of. So that works quite nice. And then PhDs, people tend to come to me with their own ideas. Hopefully they're in the men's health space, which helps because then I can help them. But sometimes they might come to me and it might be, I want to do photo voice, so we'll have John as, as a co-supervisor because he's got some background in that. So, but for the most part, it is men's health, and often these really great ideas that I never would have thought of, and they want to do them. So you just help them along the way with the craft of it. Support them with money wherever we can, because clinicians, when they drop out of clinical work, they lose money. We, want to try and help them a little bit, to offset the amount of time they need to spend on this stuff, because it does take time. And we work reasonably close. I'm not a big meetings person. It tends to be, they'll send me written product. They'll let me know when it is. I'll protect the time and get a quick turnaround so they can get back onto it and those sorts of things. So, and the ones that know where they're going, if they're going to a tenure track position, I certainly try to, orientate them to some of the demands of the job that they might not necessarily know, that might help them think about how they're going to make the case for a job.
Okay.
And some who aren't headed in that direction, then you start to ask about what it is they're hoping to get and how I might be able to help in different directions. So some people want to be more an administrator, like do a master's or PhD, and then administer grants after, but not be a person who's on the hook for writing grants and a tenure track position. And it's great when they tell you, because then you can adjust your mentorship, for exactly that.
Absolutely. And are these students all nursing students, or are they from different areas?
Masters are typically nurses.
Okay.
We have nurse practitioner program that's a master's, and they tend to be really, really solid in their writing. And then PhDs and postdocs from all over. Yeah, so I kind of straddle psychology, sociology, health sciences. So I get them from everywhere. Population, public health, medicine, all over. So it's great because you learn a lot from the different disciplines, and so they'll come to you and, kind of want to spend some time with you, do the PhD with you, some postdoctoral work where we really focus on publications and grants and getting that sort of aspect right. But yeah, they're from all over. Yeah, which is good.
Yeah, that sounds interesting to have students from all different backgrounds and areas, but maybe it presents maybe some challenges too when there's not necessarily the disciplinary consistency where you're in nursing or psychology and your students are all from nursing or psychology, but also you have different perspectives too.
Definitely. And we have out-of-towners. We have a lot of internationals who hit me up and want to do something about masculinities and something or other. Yeah. And, we get a bit of a sense of them, get a sense of how they write, their thinking, and then we can bring them in if we think, we can help them apply at least. And they usually come in through population public health. Interdisciplinary is an interesting one at UBC because you might come from a psychology background or a kinesiology background, but do something that's interdisciplinary, that is broad and open, and then I can supervise you even though I'm from nursing. We might name nursing as your home department, but it won't be a PhD in nursing, which will keep your job prospects open if you're looking for tenure track. So we do all that kind of stuff, and we sort of work with folks. We've had some internationals as well that have done really well, just, different contexts, and you learn a lot from them because their cultures and the way they think about gender and things are different. Which just helps us, just gets us out of our own backyard, which is great. Yeah.
It's been great. I don't have other questions I want to jump in with right now. So what questions do you have?
This interview got dramatically better when I shut up. So I just want to mention that it really did. It got way better when I just piped down and started listening. That's number one. John, it's really clear from just sitting back and listening that you're so genuine about. It strikes me, and please do correct me. You take experiences from your life and things you've thought about, and they have sparked your interests in your lab, in your interventions. So the thoughts about masculinity that you got from your uncle and from your first profession, those help shape your thoughts about men and masculinities. Is that you now, for a living, implement interventions around the world? Am I anywhere near the ballpark of truth or correctness?
Yeah, and what a privilege, right? Because it's being paid to think is pretty privileged. Right. And people say, what'd you do today? And I'll go, well, I thought about some stuff and got a little bit of ink on the page and thought about remedy. So it's been incredible. It's an incredible privilege and honor to be able to just think through this stuff. But I would say with the masculinity stuff, one of the epiphanies outside of personal experience, one of the epiphanies was Connell's work, Rowan Connell's work in masculinities, the plurality of it, in which she talked to these ideals and whether we're subordinate, marginalised, complicit, or we're protesting those ideals. And I read the book, and I'm not a big reader. I'm a big writer, not a great reader. And anyhow, I read that book in a day, and I was like, oh my God, the world just see the world a bit differently, because it's a frame that just helps you see things, and make sense of them. It never left me. And so just opened it up. So I do work with that frame. And I do think about things, in that frame, which just helps. It's not like you pour your life into the framework, or pour data into the framework. Right. It's like it just helps you contextualize it. So I've loved that. I love that opportunity. But yeah, it's pretty lucky, or not lucky, or just hard work. No. But in terms of enjoying that space, the days go really quick.
But your program of research is meaningful to you. It's personally and professionally meaningful. It's not like you looked at the roster of possible things you could do research on in your life and you spun the wheel and I'm going to study frogs and frog reproduction. Nope. I mean, what you do means something to you. I can hear it in your voice. I can watch it when you're giving a presentation yesterday. And this is a weird time thing when people listen to this. And the presentation you made tonight.
Yeah, right.
Right? I mean, you can just tell that this is something that you're genuine and passionate about, and it means something to you, as opposed to other people who will publish something in a developmental psychology journal because that's their job.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And again, I encourage students and early career folks to find their passion, because it just makes it easier. Like, there's some days I go in and it'll be like 8 o'clock and I'll put my head up and it's 8 o'clock again. And it's not a bad day. It's not like a grind. It's like I'm enjoying it. And I just think, it's that old thing. If you find something you really enjoy, then it's so much easier to do. It's great to be authentically in the space, because I see people who do battle, and I've also seen some careers where people chase the money. Like, so we're funding this year, and we're funding this year, and they chase, and they contort themselves. And one of the wisest pieces of advice I got early on was like, stick with your passion. It'll come around. They might not be funding it this year, but it's okay. You just keep working. They told me, keep circling your wagons. And I kind of like it. It's such sage advice, because I would not want to contort. And I don't think the imposter piece, I think that's when I'd feel like the true imposter is like, I'm doing this up for money so as I can continue research. Yeah, it's not my real passion area, but I'm going to do it because it'll satiate, my evaluation of my performance this year. So we've always stuck with that. It's done us well, because it's great to be doing something you enjoy.
Right.
There's not much else, is there?
The other piece that struck me, you were telling the story about you started your PhD in Australia, and you got cherry picked. I don't know what verb you would use, but you got plucked by UBC. Somebody recognized your talent,
right,
at UBC. Even though you were 3 chapters into your dissertation.
Yeah.
So someone recognized talent and took a risk on a doctoral student, and I'm assuming funded you to move from Australia to Canada.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a split vote. It was a 9-1-1 vote. So it was,
I'm sorry, what does that mean?
9-4, 1 against and 1 abstention.
In
Should we hire John Oliffe?
Hire as a dissertation student?
Hire into it. So they brought me into an instructor role.
Oh, okay.
3 chapters in. And so, I did have a faculty position. So it was a split vote. And
that's not very split. Split would have been 5-4-1. With all due respect, sir.
See, I'm not quantitative, right?
Okay,
so I'm battling with these numbers. But
right. Do you want me to describe the qualitative split? Do you want me to get a pen and paper and write this out?
But so it was interesting in that respect. But again, I did the 2-day, interview. I flew myself over for it. I said, look, would you interview me? And they said yes. So I bankrolled it, went in, and I did present because I had data, and it was kind of new. It had the photos, which was, back then in the early 2000s was kind of like, this is a bit different. And I could feel it in the room that there were people that were like, this is a bit new. This is good. I could work with him. And there were some people that could see it before I could see it. And those folks were the mentors that when I got there did that work. But so, I got drafted for sure, but it was, they were generous and they had vision, because I I follow the NFL a lot, and I think the way we draft people in the NFL, it's certain criteria, right? Mm-hmm. And we miss the Tom Brady's, like the undrafted,
seventh round, right?
So Mr. Irrelevant isn't always Mr. Irrelevant. So sometimes you can see a rough edge that would be all right, that you could work with, that would be malleable, and I would think that's probably what happened.
Yeah, I really appreciate, I think you're in the part of your career, I think you've mentioned this with the people that you work with, that you recognize talent. You can help a person get better in their strengths. Right. And when you were talking about you can help someone get better at something and they may not appreciate it for 10 years. The thought I had was Simon Cowell. If you watch he gives actually very honest feedback, of which some people don't appreciate, right. But it's normally motivated to help someone become a better singer, better performer. And it's not normally mean-spirited, at least if you watch. I don't watch a lot, but I watch clips on YouTube from time to time. And so, most educators are giving constructive feedback for people to get better at what they're doing, even if the person takes it in a negative manner. So, all of that is a long-winded way of saying, I think that's, over time, that's the skill, one of the skills you've obtained, which is the ability to recognize talent and help people get better in places where they can get better.
Yeah, and I think it's on all of us. And I think you can do it from anywhere. It doesn't have to be end career stuff. You can see rookies and people who come into the field and graduates and you can see ways in which you can help them. And I enjoy that part of it. Just because it's just being a good citizen, but also the ones where they probably don't recognise the lesson until 10 years later, oftentimes will be they're not doing the work. And you can't. And mentorship is one of the things I've learned about mentorship is you can't make the difference. You can provide the opportunity and the coaching, but there's very little point in writing them from second, and that's where I run into a little bit of, it's not much point me writing it for you. It's going to be better if you do the hard yards of it. So, again, just the Simon Cowell piece, absolutely, honest feedback, not to be disparaging and not to hurt, but just honest feedback, just to where you're at, where you want to be, how I can help. But it's ultimately going to be on you and effort and stuff. And one of my favourite Simon Cowell quotes is, never stay too long at the fair. I really like that. I still think about that a lot. Yeah.
John, you're thinking back about your career, and I'm glad to hear that you have 5 to 10 years left. That's a longer time frame than I have left. But this isn't about me; it's about you.
What? Say that again?
I'm glad to hear that you have 5 to 10 years left. I said it again, Matt. What advice would you give if you had to do it all over again? Is there any advice you would offer? Any words of wisdom?
I think, that's interesting. I don't know that I've thought fully about that. Just for the things that I probably didn't do well, I'd just say it's really important to keep balance. There's some things that I probably should have paid attention to along the way. That maybe, it was a bit too work focused at times. And so I just a shout out that I know people, are cued to that idea of work balance. But just to say, for the end for me would be a little bit of retrospection would be, probably could have smelt the roses a bit more along the way. So I'd just say celebrate the milestones. Always look for the opportunity to have a break because you'll come back a bit cleaner. I oftentimes went the second shift and the third shift because it was the grind and I felt like it was going to make the difference, and maybe it did, but there's other things you give up along the way. So just a shout out about balance. That would be the retrospective, sure. But the advice of the elder statesman stepping out, in the next 5 to 10 years would just be do what you enjoy, like make it your passion, because it's such a privileged position to be able to think for a living. I mean, that's way loftier than I ever thought I was going to get. Yeah.
Absolutely. Matt, anything else you would add or ask?
No, I don't have anything else to add or ask. This has been delightful.
Yeah, the one thing I regret here is I wish I would have pressed record. I really do. This has been a great warm up, and
That's the first take.
I'm now ready to press record. This has been an excellent rehearsal. I'm sorry. John, Matt, thanks for your time today. I'm glad you laughed and didn't cry at that. It's been awesome. Thanks for being a guest on Psych Sessions.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Thanks, man.